So the state is expected to present its head of arguments in the rape and human trafficking case against televangelist Timothy Omotoso and his co-accused Lusanda Sulani and Zukiswa Sitho in the High Court in Gqeberha today. Yesterday, defense lawyer Peter Doberman brought an application before the Gqeberha court in terms of Section 174 of the Criminal Procedure Act. This is for his client's release. Doberman told the court that the entire trial and the evidence of the complainants were tainted by prosecutorial misconduct. Our reporter Lerato Fekisi has more.
Well, a very good morning. This morning in court, what we're expecting to hear is the heads of arguments from the state. Yesterday, defense lawyer Peter Doberman really poked holes at this case, asking for two things. One, saying that he's going to apply for Section 174, which states that all charges against Omotoso and his co-accused must be dropped and this case must be dissolved because there's no real evidence that warrants him to be prosecuted. And then he went really to dig deep at the holes and the loopholes, I think, of the state in this matter of Timothy Omotoso, where he was stating that he feels that Omotoso has not been given a fair trial and justice would not be prevailed for him if he is to be prosecuted, stating that taking the matter back to as far as when Advocate Ntelo wasn't part of the case. And I think a huge part of his evidence during the heads of arguments as to why this case must be dropped was pointing to the weaknesses, the inconsistencies, the injustices that he feels were done by Advocate Ntelo during the time when he was part of this case. He spoke about how there was evidence that Advocate Ntelo coerced witnesses to commit perjury, and saying that that alone is reason enough to believe that Omotoso has not been given a fair trial. He really zoomed into the testimony also of Malusha Gianni, which he stated, and I quote him, saying that the evidence that she brought to court was so flawed that they couldn't even use it as evidence for this case. Concerning Gianni, he pointed out that when she first testified to the Hawks about what allegedly happened to her during her time with Omotoso, he stated that originally she had told the Hawks that Omotoso inserted his finger into a private part. Then when she went for an interview with Dr. Miller, the psychologist, and also Advocate Serfontein, who was a prosecutor at that time, she stated that he indeed inserted fingers into her private part. And then when she went to have her testimony with Advocate Ntelo, she said that she did state that he did insert Omotoso did insert his fingers into a private part. But when Advocate Ntelo wrote this down, he just said that Omotoso touched her private parts, but not necessarily state that fingers were inserted into Gianni's private part. And then the state said the reason perhaps why he said that is that perhaps he misunderstood what Gianni was saying, and Peter Doberman was saying that, in fact, the state had lied, saying that Ntelo perhaps misunderstood her testimony, something that he said could not be true, because how could a psychologist, how could the Hawks, how could Serfontein all say one thing, and then all of a sudden when it got Advocate Ntelo, the testimony changed. And then he also went as far as saying that the reason why Gianni then in court this time, when she was being interviewed during a cross-examination of Peter Doberman, she stated that indeed a finger was inserted, and saying that the reason perhaps why Advocate Ntelo didn't include this in his statement was because he felt that it wasn't strong enough for it to be converted into a rape charge. And he was saying that throughout this case, Ntelo had not shown himself to be a true prosecutor, to be a true minister of truth, to be for someone that stands for truth and fairness in this case. He also pointed out that it was the same Advocate Ntelo who started a WhatsApp group with all the witnesses as part of this group, saying that any sane or any culpable prosecutor would not do this, saying that he didn't understand, and even asked him at the time why he would start such a group, because he felt that within this group Ntelo would influence the witnesses to change their statements or influence them to say a particular thing to the detriment of Omotoso. So he pointed out those three things, saying that there have been various correspondence also between Ntelo and Serfontein, when Ntelo would tell Serfontein to change specific testimonies to a certain thing to the detriment of Omotoso. So throughout Peter Doberman's testimony, what he really harped on and what he really wanted to point out was just the unfairness, the lack of truth from Delwa's part, the lack of justice, the lack of fairness in this trial, and really persuading in the end, towards the end of his argument, stating to Judge Omar Skuman that any truthful judge will not prosecute Omotoso and his co-accused, because there have been so many flaws, there have been so many inconsistencies in the testimony of the witnesses, and he believes truly that Omotoso and his co-accused have not had a fair trial, and based on that, Section 174 must be implemented, the charges against Omotoso and his co-accused must be dropped, and this case dissolved. So this morning we're going to hear how the state now is going to answer to that and see what case they bring forward as to why Omotoso and his co-accused must be trialed. For now, it's back to you in studio.